From Vasily Lomachenko being furious over a stolen win, to Oscar De La Hoya's victory being decided before he stepped into the ring, here are the most controversial commission calls ever made. Boxing, MMA, or pretty much any other contact sport all have something in common. They're super unpredictable. You never know when a straightforward decision will turn into a controversy, causing big problems for the judges and the fighters. Something like this happened pretty recently, with the Loma vs. Devin Haney bout, and believe me when I tell you that people are furious. All worked out well for the lightweight champion. I mean, he got to keep his title, along with all of his belts. But guess who got the very short end of the stick? Yup, the Ukrainian. In fact, his management and fans seem to think that the win was stolen from him. Crazy, I know, but their side of the story makes a little bit of sense. The match between the two had quite a number of close calls. Now, I'm not saying that Haney didn't know what he was doing because it was anything but that. It's just that the unanimous decision made it seem like he was handed the victory. Even though Loma was the clear dominant fighter in the last few rounds, especially rounds 10 and 11, in the end, no one knows who'd won, but I'm just gonna say it. People secretly hoped it would be Loma. Sadly for them, this wasn't the case. The judges ended up scoring in Haney's favor. Let me just say this. The decision wasn't popular immediately. Did you know that Haney got booed in his post-fight interview? The Ukrainian fighter's manager, Igor Klimas, claimed it was the biggest robbery in the middle of the day. Poor Loma was recorded crying after the bout, and that just made everyone side with him even more. The popular opinion is that the US-based commission ruled in an American's favor, which is a pretty biased and somewhat racist thing to do. I know the two were neck and neck, but come on, man. Another controversial call that left many folks scratching their heads was in favor of Islammakhachev. The champ did a good job defending his title at UFC 284 against the featherweight champ alexvolkanovski. But things took a bizarre turn when cheating accusations started emerging. One of Makhachev's former opponents, Dan Hooker, came ahead with an allegation, saying that the Dagestani fighter used an IV. Well, the language that he used was super colorful, and ended with the hangman calling Makhachev a cheating dog. But I'm gonna spare you the details. While plenty of evidence suggested that the fighter used an IV for rehydration, the Australian Commission wasn't really into opening up an investigation or even looking at the matter closely. Instead, they went into a completely defensive mode, saying that the fighter had done nothing wrong and that some IVs were actually allowed. Seems fishy, doesn't it? This next controversial decision came from the infamous Nikolai Valuev versus Evander Holyfield fight. This bout from December 2008 still raises a lot of questions. Evander Holyfield won, and considering his opponent's performance, the guy deserved to win. But this is where things get a little messed up. You see, even though Holyfield's performance wasn't at all spectacular, it was still hundreds and thousands of times better than what Valuev put on. Even if you look at the fight now, after all these years, you won't believe there was a heavyweight title on the line. The worst of all was that when the decisions came in, the score was around 115 to 114. This was wild because most of the time, it was just Valuev simply standing there while his opponent beat him up. And last I checked, that definitely didn't result in a close call. Nick Charles, the ultimate announcer, even called it the worst display of officiating. It was even suggested that Holyfield should have won all the rounds because Valuev's performance wasn't at all enough to claim even one. Harsh, I know, but the Russian giant really was that bad. This next controversial bout disappointed one of the fighters so much that he chose to retire. Have you ever heard of the James Toney versus Dave Tiberi bout? Going into the fight, everyone was around 70% sure that the decision would come out in favor of James Lights Out Toney. And well, that much makes sense. After all, it was his 5th title defense. The middleweight champ knew what he was doing, but that wasn't the case. The same goes for the judges. Toney had trouble making weight, and going in, he looked very slow. The stats for this match show that he annihilated the champ, but did he get the IBF title he deserved? Yeah, that didn't happen. So Judge Frank Burnett was the only one who correctly scored the fight. His card came out in favor of Tiberi with 117 to 111. But what about the other two? Well, they had something else on their minds. Judges Frank Garza and Bill Lurch had an identical scorecard of 115 to 112 going in favor of Toney. None of this made sense, so an investigation was opened into the matter. And get this, these two judges weren't even licensed to judge fights in New Jersey. Tiberi was so disgusted by this bias that he chose to retire after the fight. Another decision that caused a huge controversy was the Pernell Whitaker versus Julio Cesar Chavez fight. Let me just say this, the aftermath of this was chaos. poor Whittaker has faced many problems during his career, but the worst one was definitely this fight. Going into the bout, his opponent Chavez had a perfect record of 87-0. He was even considered the undisputed pound-for-pound king, and while many expected the decision to go in his favor, Whittaker soon took control of the fight. Round 4 onwards, it was Win City. Population Purnell Sweet Pea Whittaker. At this point, Chavez was struggling to land even a single punch. The commentators were sure Sweet Pea was the victor. The crowd knew that he was gonna win. Even the Chavez fans were completely silent towards the end. But turns out the judges had something completely different in their mind. The first scorecard read 115 to 113, placing Whittaker in the lead. But the gap was a little too small. That should have been red flag number 1. The next two came out 115 to 115. Letting Chavez save his face with a draw. This one's sometimes referred to as the worst decision in the history of boxing. And the next morning, newspapers had Whittaker's shocked face printed all over them, with the words "robbed" written across. The Park Si-hoon versus Roy Jones Jr. matchup is also definitely up there on the list. Now, we all know Jones to be an amazing boxer. The man captured world titles in not 1, not 2, but 4 weight divisions. He even spent years as the undisputed pound-for-pound king. But did you know that all this glory came later? He was actually ripped off at the start. I'm talking about the Seoul Games. Back in 1998, the US Olympian almost won gold. He didn't lose a single round in the competition, and even annihilated his opponent Park Si-hoon with an 86-32 count. But guess what happened? The judges came out with a 3-2 decision, letting the victory go in the Koreans' favor. It was later discovered that a little something was going on the side, where the Korean organizers bribed the judges. All might be clear now, but Jones Jr. never got the medal he deserved. Next came the Oscar De La Hoya versus Felix Strom bout. I guess it's safe to say that money talks, even in such a seemingly transparent sport as boxing. I mean, the skills are on clear display there for everyone to see. But sometimes, even that doesn't stop some judges from dipping into dangerous side hustles. You know, selling their integrity and whatnot. This is exactly what happened to the poor middleweight champ from Germany. Felix Strom made his first American appearance in 2004. Unfortunately, it didn't go as planned. His bout with De La Hoya showed him as the clear victor. Did you know that Strom's opponent hadn't fought above 154 pounds before? That should be enough for you to understand where this is headed. Even though De La Hoya was clearly slow and super out of shape, he still won. The scores came out identical, 115 to 133 in favor of Oscar, which was clearly not what happened in the ring. But turns out there was actually a super fight in the works. You see, before this bout, De La Hoya was already lined up to fight Bernard Hopkins. This was supposed to be a super fight, and letting Strom take the win, which by the way he rightly deserved, would have ruined the scheduled fight. I guess you can say that the decision was made well before the two stepped into the ring. There you have it, folks. From Oscar De La Hoya's victory being decided before he stepped into the ring, to Vasily Lomachenko being furious over a stolen win, this was everything on the most controversial commission calls ever made.